Hola,
Hey, this is Kasia.
I'm Kasia. A few months ago, we've embarked on this passion project together, which we called AI narratives. So basically, stories that we as humans tell ourselves about AI. Why is that important, you might ask? Well, because words influence the way we think, and stories influence the things we build.
So we're gonna walk you through what to do and how to grab what you think is important, how to make sure that it actually paints the balanced picture, and how to process it, deciding on what you want to do, what you want to share with your human colleague, what you want to share with your AI colleague, and how can you arrive at something that is valuable. And we will also share some mishaps on the way.
Yeah, some fuck ups. So before we start going into this, in the first episode, we actually shared our positionality. So basically, where we come from, what are our maybe biases or thoughts, values, and things we see as important as human beings, which we bring to this work as designers, obviously, because we cannot detach ourselves from that. And we thought that we actually forgot to share the third of like the positionality of our third partner, which is the AI co-pilot.
Exactly. So, like, I just thought to myself, that's not fair, and that's a phrase that is with me since I remember. So, we tried to talk about how we can make the actual picture more 3D. And as I mentioned, we had our AI colleague, so we used AI assistant along the way to some extent. So we started chatting with it to find out what biases and what positionality is sort of interwoven into how AI works and functions. And it was super happy to tell on itself.
You can find like more of those biases and that on our LinkedIn's. But we're going to share some of it now. So one of the very important ones for me is that the majority of those LLMs that we use until like half of this year, let's say, have been created in Europe and North America, in the US, in Silicon Valley, in European hubs that also look into Silicon Valley, and that this is where those values of Silicon Valley come through, especially the one that is like thinks fast. I always forget this. Like, just like build and break and see what happens later. So without much of, I would say, maybe responsibility in mind.
And like use the actual reality as your playground.
Yeah, so that's definitely been part of that like LLMs have been showing that for the past 2 years. And I said like till mid of this year because we see Chinese models also being put out there, and that's not something that we looked into in our research, to be honest. So just putting it out there. It's there, but we're not going to talk about it today.
Right. So, as any project, this had its timeline, and it didn't include the latest enhancements. So that's why we back then we were coming up with English as a language, white as a race, and male as a main gender in terms of who is actually developing AI and who's replicating their ideas. Do you want to talk about English echo chamber? Because I think that's one of your favorite biases, right?
Yeah, that we base a lot of those models on a English language texts. So this obviously brings in invisibly the English language culture, and again, North America, British, all those stories that those countries also told themselves and the world about themselves. So how they're great powers, etc. And also it skips the stories of or knowledge stories, beliefs, values of languages or of cultures that they don't have languages that are very much spoken, so they are omitted. Also, what's omitted is all the actual spoken culture or things that have been passed on through stories and only through talking and not writing about them. So I think this is those are the bits and pieces that we're missing here.
And I think, like, as you can tell, we're not native English speakers, and I am sure that many of you experience this situation in which you talk to another non-native English speaker, and suddenly your sentences become structured in a different way. You start using Latin base, for example, in Europe. Examples that are, or like phrasings and even words sometimes, because the English translation is far more foreign to you than the one that you're using, because you have the same root of your language. And I think, like, beyond the stories as a whole, like you mentioned, there's also the way our thought process is structured is often structured through language. So that means we're replicating that structures as well by training LLMs on English structured input. So that's also like creating the logic of how those large language models think.
For sure. And that we're missing a lot of languages, a lot of those, a lot of this logic, again, culture, just process of thinking. That's
one of the like examples that's
sad.
Yeah, it is sad. Like, for example, as you know, like my son is autistic, and we have this one word for it that is replicated in many languages. But then in Maori, there is a term for kids and adults like that, which means in their own time and space. And that's what this word basically very literally means, right? And that, like, you're smiling right now, right? Like, it has a completely different connotation, and also doesn't have a barrier of entry in terms of knowing something specialistic versus not knowing it.
For sure.
Yeah. So, like, this is something that we should take into account, and and it's something that we discovered when we wanted to include AI's positionality in this process.
What were your favorite ones?
So, of course, my favorite one is Logic Love. I come from qualitative research, and this is like my core, my academic background, and it was years and years ago, but it's still dear to my heart. And I face time and time again this concept of real data or hard data, which means numbers are sort of the tell-all and like the ultimate guide through reality, and the tech world is even sort of relying on numbers even beyond qualitative versus quantitative data. Just in its very nature, it's a numbers game. It's a numeric system. So it values that sort of input as its very core, as its value. So it's sort of kind of natural for the progress of the discipline to favor this kind of input versus social sciences versus emotional intelligence and so on. So this sort of input is going to be imbalanced.
Is it what you're saying, that it's like building an app without talking to users?
That's one thing. And also building an app on the logic of a library. Like, how would you, for example, organize books in a library versus how you do it in your own home?
Yeah, exactly. So like, right? In the sense of like the hard data, it makes sense. It's it's obviously logical, and it's how it should be because someone put it in a framework or someone came up with it. Versus there's like stories of how we live at home, and this might be missing in those data sets.
I think so. In those decisions, how to progress in terms of development as well.
Yeah, exactly. Those stories are, I think, what Nora Bateson called warm data. So versus this hard data is like warm data. So the realities that we see and we live has value.
Yeah, for sure.
And
for sure.
Here, the value is like, not sure.
Yeah,
we're not sure about whether this value is being seen. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and sometimes even we see examples of it being excluded. Yeah, and then that's not the only favorite of mine.
Okay, tell me the next one. Tell us the next one.
So the next one is Ivory Tower Tilt. So maybe you're familiar with the Tilted Tower of Pisa. By you, I mean not you, Kasia, but you, our beloved listener. And Ivory Tower is obviously referencing Ivy League and like this ivory tower, meaning rich, privileged, and so on. And when we were analyzing it with the chatbot, it sort of underline this career growth or a career path of software development that values certain types of schools, certain types of academic advancements, like doing things right and in the right order, and like how well established are the certification centers that you can show you have. And I'm sure we as we don't come from those fields, we work within them. But I often see in other paths, other competencies, people really valuing that someone had a gap year and worked on a lavender farm for a year and a half, or that someone actually came from marine biology to product management and so on. So there are disciplines in which the sort of irregular path is valued as rooted in more fields, whereas in software development, this like very brick by brick, logical, conclusive path is something that makes you progress and ultimately sit on those decision tables.
I feel like there is this narrative of also like college dropouts that are being very successful in startups, but possibly it's more about the startup founders, not engineers themselves. So yeah.
But I think like the statistics of college dropouts actually employing college dropouts wouldn't be, yeah.
Yeah, we have to check that though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be super fun to check. However, I've heard those conversations of like, oh, this is a great data scientist, he has 2 PhDs.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I think like the street smarts are not influencing the shaping of AI narratives or AI as a tool or a problem space right now. Yeah. So that's one that I really enjoy and feel like is this aha moment that I really like.
I think we should also close this part of our companion and talking about how wrong they are, or like what are their biases. Like again, we shared our biases in the first one, and we're gonna now move into the project description, or like our methodology description, basically. So how do we collect data? What kind of frameworks we used or we didn't use? And how did we work with the AI companion? And how did we add the human touch to it? Do you want to go with the first one?
Yeah. So as you all probably experience, when you start a project, you basically brain dump. And in our case, we data dumped. So like we started off even like throughout conversation that we had and like throughout forming this collective or this collaboration, just posting and throwing into a whiteboard more and more examples of like stories people tell about AI on a daily basis, or reports that get published, and they would start snowballing.
Yeah, from like LinkedIn.
From PDF reports, I'm sure like folks collect and then read to a certain extent.
Yeah, tell me how many you did. Exactly. You have on your computer, and how many did you read? And I'll tell you what kind of human being you are. This like quiz. How many of those things that you have in your tabs have you read? But coming back to the topic today, we also had like obviously articles from newspapers or bespoke magazines, etc., etc. Yeah. So things that we saw being circulated in social media. AI Act was part of it as well. Yeah. So things that were hot or that we saw our colleagues and people around us finding interesting.
And I would say that like at the beginning, we couldn't really tell why this and not the other.
Yeah.
And I think it was a very important point not to stop ourselves, actually. Like not to second guess what we were choosing at that point, but just like let it go and follow our intuition, because this is the like human factor, the sort of unconventional connections you can make, and then worry about sorting it later. So don't be your own naysayer and don't stop would be my advice.
Yeah, for sure. Just going into different directions and different corners of the internet.
Yeah, but then there comes this moment when you feel like, okay, I'm gonna probably want to tell a story about what I'm doing, and I'm gonna I'm gonna be met with some questions. So we were trying to like figure out what would feel good to us in terms of like ethics and best practices of research, and what we find as like a good way of diversifying the stories that we were encountering.
Yeah, exactly. And we also did a framework dump basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So the things that someone like I had in my masters, or I saw online, or Kasia, one Kasia or the other Kasia did at work at some point, like just like all of those things that we thought this could be interesting, this could work here, and this is how we could think about a certain piece of it. But we also didn't want to just choose one or two frameworks at the beginning and say this is what we're gonna do.
And I honestly think it kind of was human nature out to a certain degree. Like you and I, we knew each other, but we didn't yet build this like shorthand or understanding. We were also in the process of building collaboration. And I feel like if I like look back at those moments when we were like copy pasting frameworks, copy pasting text, we kind of we've chosen a middle ground in which we kind of wanted to use as much as we could. So we didn't want to like convince one another which is better, but like figure out ways that those things could work together.
And to that, I think we both were interested in the other frameworks that the other person was bringing. So more like, oh, I want to learn and I want to see how it's implemented, rather than, I'm here to convince you that my framework is the framework for that. And shall we throw some of those frameworks that we thought about? So we put the systems thinking iceberg model, which is like events, patterns, structures, momentum models, which is very similar to the causal layered analysis that many of you probably know, for futures, like future archetypes, future cone, three horizons. Kasia?
So I think you might think like we're talking AI, we're talking narratives. Why are we talking about futures model? And I think both of us sort of from the get-go wanted to exercise designing for the futures. So, and not to just think in this binary terms of like positive versus negative, utopia, dystopia outcome. And so we wanted to throw in those frameworks, also like co-emerging futures that focus around sort of values we choose to be the front runner of the culture ahead. So it can be the intellect versus it can be humanity as the biggest virtue, and that would be like a transmutation of what we are, versus like this transformation more rooted in ecology or sustainability, and like what sort of future that creates. And then we wanted to use that as a ecosystem in which we would then analyze our narratives.
And parts of those frameworks we have used already, even though we haven't kind of built future scenarios as such so far. That we've been only trying to see like the narratives that we were working on, or we were extracting or exploring. How do they look into the future, basically, or which futures do they belong to more, or describe, or have this directionality towards, to see how they spread on those future models, which was also in itself very interesting, though it probably wasn't legal, like when it comes to like futures, how, what, when.
And there's also one pretty illegal way we use one of the future models that you actually suggested, because like let's think about how that really points to the process and like the data collection. And that we reached this point when curiosity like brought as much as it could, and we started questioning how do we make sure that this is a differentiated data set. And one of the future models that you brought actually helped with that.
Do you mean by Steep V? Or Steep V, which is like a bit of futures, but also like for data collections, so signal collection and trends. So it's like this, you look at the world as for society, technology, economy, ecology, political, and values. So you try to map out what you see in the world now. And this is something I've been using a lot, and I know a lot of futurists like go through that lens. Though I was talking to Tai from Feminist Futures, and she said like, I was talking to someone else, and this person commented that it's a very patriarchal kind of way of looking at the world, and it's like very fragmented and very disconnected from each other. And that's what brought us to think, okay, how those parts are actually interconnected, and like how they come one into one, and like it's like a matryoshka thingy. I don't know what's matryoshka, like a doll. Yeah, exactly. So one comes from in another and another and another. So we thought we would transform it and look at it from the like individual perspective, community, society, technology as well, even though it's like a bit more in between those all, economy and the planet. So basically, like an individual lives in a society, in a community, which is in a society which operates within an economy and the planet. So basically, to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and so that's what we used to see if we have enough in terms of topics that those articles were aiming to cover, those posts were aiming to cover, and reports. So because that was the axis on which we were looking at, like, okay, is it this about, do we have something about planet? Do we have something that talks in terms of the impact on society, the financial impact, and so on? But there was also another way we made sure that those data points, which is text in our case, were different.
Yeah, the vertical was basically to map out the network, the actors and networks that those texts come from. And this is something I caught at a presentation of the master students of responsible AI from Elisava earlier this year. And I wrote it down that there was a framework, and then we put it on Miro, and then I didn't put the name of the framework, and only like bits and pieces of it. And then we realized we don't really know what's the framework. Like,
oh,
what's
not
the name.
then. We realized that months later. Like we took it and ran with it.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we know where it comes from. We know it's legit and that it is out there and it was used. But we just don't know. We're not 100% sure what's the name. We checked with Perplexity, and it says it's from the Latour's network theory.
It's kind of checks out. I mean, it does, yeah.
It's not exactly these things that we have on the post-it that I put it on, which is also a very, I think, a lesson learned already from like relying too much on technology, in the sense of, I put it out there, and then you can have this idea or this thought, it doesn't matter, I'll check it with AI. I mean, AI will find it, and if it's not ChatGPT, you can check. Many people say like Perplexity will give you the source. Yes, maybe not this time.
Yeah, and I actually think it's beautiful. Like, if we have any researchers in the audience, you know how genius it sometimes feels when you figure out the right criteria to differentiate your probe. And probably like half of those types, because there are 5 or 6 of those like levels of types of text, not subjects of text, possibly are made by us in the process of like that doesn't really fit, that doesn't really capture what we're saying in the data. So we were transforming the model that you collected to something that was actionable and usable in the context of our project. And I love it, and I'm even happier that like you can't really trace it back.
It's a good lesson learned, and it's a good lesson to share. And that's also that frameworks are there obviously to help us think, but they are as you were saying before. I don't know, before now or before in our conversation having coffee, that they are also constructed in a certain point in time. So it works for that time. And then you come across them, and it doesn't mean if they are not 100% what you need, because they may be outdated, that you cannot play with them and say, okay, this is like, it's being inspired by this. And I think we're being inspired by Latour's actors network theory. I'm sure it's Latour's work in general, because I remember reading it. I'm not sure it's this theory, but there it is.
Doesn't really matter, I think. Okay, so we're now at this point where we have the raw data. We made sure that is, we actually didn't only make sure that is representative of the like whole spectrum of the conversation, but we actually went out and searched for some more data points, because we felt there were points of our matrix that we were missing. So what's next, right? So now the digging begins, and I would be happy to start this part of
Digging?
yeah.
Yeah, go dig.
Well, we digged through it
Yeah,
already.
yeah, yeah.
But something that I've been experimenting for almost a year now is like tailoring AI assistants to your own needs, which means like the power of computing of LLMs is met with your specific ask, tasks, and actor that you want the AI to be, and basically creating your mini me and making sure that they do the job that you like the least in the process, and that can be different for many people.
Or is time consuming?
In terms of like human brains, it takes way too much computing versus the outcome. So one of the things that I often notice when I'm analyzing transcripts is I have 5 ideas at the same time and I'm only able to follow one thread, like one topic, one sort of insight, and like look for more clues on that. With AI, you can prompt engineer a prompt that's going to collect all of those and like sort all of those in the text, and will use at once. And the process of coming up with those five things is something that happens while reading. So like by the end of it, you're collecting 5 things, but at the beginning you were only sort of making note of the first thing, and that's the advantage you get when you construct an assistant like that, because it does what it's told from the get-go, replicably on all the texts, and you're able to basically scale this analytic idea that you have across your data set.
Do you want to tell us your prompts, or
no?
Of course not.
I mean, I can tell you, I kind of already did that, right? So, and I'm sure you can find recipes on how to construct a prompt well, but I described the type of experience I would want it to pretend to have. I described the fields in which I think it should be knowledgeable. So social sciences, semantics analysis, looking on declarative data and sort of going deeper. So those are like competence-based elements of the prompt. Then outside of the prompt, the assistant was also constructed in a way that it wouldn't source outside for information. It would only source the text that I would give it, but it would use this LLMs that it had outside of our data set as a processing power. So like everything it learned outside of our research was its brain, and the sort of results it was coming back with were only directly coming from the transcripts or articles or reports that we had. And then the third component I think is important is that there is this dial that you can dial up or down to make it less or more
hallucinating or
I mean, like
creative, let's say.
The proper term is the temperature of the model.
Yeah, exactly.
So because I've experimented with it back and forth before this project a lot, I knew that for this type of work, the lower the temperature, the better, which is not the case with creative writing. And by that I mean content campaigns, not actual creative writing. Yeah, just like the tonality that we needed wasn't optimistic, encouraging. We just wanted to retrieve the message from the texts.
Exactly. So we actually gave the prompt, just like not word by word, but like,
but like the recipe
skills,
for the prompt.
Like the skills, the like think about the temperature, think about maybe who would you like to copy, because you said it was like copying you, or like making an assistant, like an assistant of yourself, kind of to yourself. Think about the person or the traits, what you like about them, or what you need, and feed the texts or the whatever you find to it. Yeah. And that's not the end, because if you overload your prompt, it's not going to know what to do. So actually, a lot of our results came later. So when you actually moderate the chat, right, and like continuously come back to this summary that it made, and it can be pain and gain points, it can be 10 commandments, like you can actually also ask it to formulate it in a specific format, and then if you have more ideas that you didn't fit in the prompt, I'm gonna have to go for some water. Okay, so don't overdo it when you're doing the prompt
engineering at the beginning. Keep it to like clear persona, simple task, temperature of your choice. And if you have those additional questions, create a scenario of the conversation using that, of the interview. And ask your questions one by one, because otherwise the machine will not know what to chase after. So that was my learning as well.
Sorry, I just need to say this. It's like telling your partner, like, or asking your partner 3 questions at once in a conversation, and they answer the easiest, the fastest, and they forget about the others.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, just be nice to the AI assistant and be like, yeah, it's like talking to my partner, and like I need one thing from them.
Yeah.
Okay, and like what's important here is that we were like parsing or like going, like using this text and learning from those texts through the AI assistant one by one. So you didn't upload 40, 50, 60 pieces. You did it one piece, you had a chat, second piece, you had a chat with the chat, etc., etc. So there was like a lot of time. Probably like with every text, it was becoming more or less obvious what are the good questions, what are the
and I was also figuring out new ones and kind of coming back to some conversations.
What did you learn about it? Like, what's key in this process, this data processing? What were the experiments you took, etc.?
I think the funnest thing, and that thing that sort of took me back to my roots, is asking the right questions, like how much of a finesse you need to actually do that, and how precious they become. Because once you have them, you have this recipe of conducting this interview, you can reuse it, and you can collect information that is so much more valuable than your first attempt. And that's also like very, very process like at the beginning you don't have all the right tools, you sort of modify them as you go. And like don't overload AI because you think it's this amazing solution for everything. You think of it as you think of a human, or you think of someone you collaborate, you have a relationship with, and you want them to do what you want them to do, and not sort of cop out with the lists.
Don't do just don't give them too long of a to-do list, because it's not gonna work. And I would add that I wouldn't add anything. I would ask another question to you if I can.
No, I think it's my turn now.
Okay.
So what were you doing when I was doing that? Because you were doing something very crucial for our process as well.
I was reading those texts. But in the meantime, I was also reading the analysis or the conversations you had with the chatbot on those texts. So some of those results or the things that we were looking into from the conversation with ChatGPT, I felt that they are missing some spice. They're correct, but they are not something I would say, oh, wow. And also maybe because I was reading the text, I was also reading the analysis, so it felt like, oh, I've heard it. So it's also part of this. So in the meantime, I was trying to collect quotes or parts of the text where I said like, oh wow, this is it, or where I was reading it and something came to my mind and I was like, it feels like an insight, or it feels like something, of an aha moment. Oh, this is gold, and I want to keep this gold, and I want us to sprinkle it on top of those things that the AI parsed and spit out, and so, that's
So did that mean also that, because like my process was also about coming back to the things that I've already analyzed? Did you have those moments of like, oh, I found this aha moment or this golden nugget in this text, let me go back to something, or do you feel like...
I was going back and forth from the text and the analysis. And the analysis would also, sometimes you would also prompt the chat, so it would bring quotes, and then I would be like, oh, there was another thing in some other text that was similar, and I was trying to find it and like kind of connect this. So that was very cool. There was also a lot of reading, and I feel some parts of it you can you can automate, and some is just like the beauty of understanding the text and having those moments where
Yep.
you're like still and focus on something.
Yeah. And then the sort of last chapter of the research part of our process was just refining, and refining. So a lot of copy pasting, changing, copy pasting again. Like I would call it like a very, very editorial sort of approach where you're trying to stay as close to the findings that you actually synthesized from the data set, but you're also making sure that while you're refining, you're not gonna zoom out to this level from which everything looks the same because you're just so far removed. So yeah, that was for me that last part of like actually formulating those key AI narratives that we found was like, yeah, refinement.
Yeah, and I would add to this that at some point you just read the same thing again and again in the same thing or in different formats. Yeah, they're spit out by AI or by us.
Yeah.
And at some point, like you kind of get lost what makes sense to someone who's not in it. Because for me, like all of that really is obvious now, and they are kind of they feel like something that probably everyone knows, and that's so then this research is not interesting to anyone probably because everyone has heard it. I mean, we just spent weeks in this.
Yeah.
And I think that what I have in mind is that what is very important for me in this process is breaks, basically not to look into this for like 2 days or something, and come back and try to read it with fresh eyes and just like, oh, this is it, and kind of do very small user testing, kind of telling your friends or someone you just met about this and what are the stories that what are the narratives, and then people say, oh, this is interesting, or it's like aha, then you're like, okay, this still makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this week was actually a great exercise in that, even though we were like far much more further down the line in terms of the whole process, but because we are this week we're collaborating in the same space, and we also get to network with a lot of people who do similar things. We would pitch or summarize what we've been working on over and over again, and after a certain time you become so much better at that, and that's one thing. And then the other thing is you have those really animated, enthusiastic reactions that you didn't have yourself for a long time, like since the first like, let's do it, this is so much fun, because you've been knees deep in that, and that's been like a really nice
Refreshment.
Exactly.
Refreshing, good moment.
Very nice one, for sure.
Shall we do like a small recap and like get to the end of it?
Yes, let's do that.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I can, sure. I think something that I learned years and years ago was very true and evident in this process, which means your intuition is valid, it's important, and don't stop yourself, because like we are all our unique persons, and try to use the tooling that you collected along the way, like frameworks, like models and so on, to make sense of what the curiosity brought to you, instead of like
following religiously,
like a sorting tool that's going to limit you.
Yeah, for sure. Then also from my perspective, at least, I feel like AI is very intimidating. It could be intimidating, and in general, like maybe techie world, for someone who's not in it, or even for someone who is in it, sometimes can be like, oh, you're not an engineer, you're not going to understand it. I would say I would ask you to maybe take a small project or a small, I don't know, even like your grocery list, and try to play it with Perplexity, ChatGPT, even Miro AI, which is out there. We also tested. We didn't mention that, but like it's also part of it. Just try to ask questions about it. Like, I don't know, your grocery list, and try to be like, okay, what's recipes could you make out of this? And then see that the recipes that they are proposing, for example, have things that are not on the list. And you see that they are creative. Okay, so lower the temperature and check, like, can you please stick to the list and make the recipes, and then repeat this comment several times, and then you'll see they'll still gonna go outside of the list. I mean, that happened to me several times.
For sure.
So to try to kind of see how that can work for you, and not to have this like, oh my god, I'm not going to use it in my work or like in my client's work because I don't know what's going to spit out.
Yeah, and use those like happy accidents. Don't shy away from them. I mean, like, they happen, and then they are like a very integral part of your process. And I can assure you, even though I don't remember the examples, there are so many chemical and physical inventions that came to life because someone spilled something where they shouldn't have. And welcome those like mistakes.
I have an example. A cheeseburger came into being this way.
Yeah.
Just like a slice of cheese popped into, slid on from the pantry or somewhere onto this marvelous piece of beef, and that's how we have a cheeseburger.
Yeah, I think that's amazing,
and the world is better with it,
for sure. And yeah, then the other thing, I think I'm not sure like if it fully came through, so I just want to make sure that in the summary I say it fully. Crossbreed your frameworks. I mean, you don't have to have a battle on which one is better and like, or drown yourself in articles what to use this framework for. You can combine them, for example, for differentiating your data set, or later for writing your summary, or during the analysis process, so you can cut it up to smaller pieces.
Have fun with it. Don't follow them religiously. And the usual, like, if you liked what you heard and you like listening to us and our stupid jokes, then go subscribe, rate, review, give us feedback. Like, just like review us nicely, and if you have negative feedback, DM us. And invite others to listen to this podcast and share us everywhere, and just like
comment, subscribe.
Yeah, exactly, all of good stuff. And we're gonna continue our stories. You want to tell people what we're gonna talk about?
I would love to share more about the actual outcomes of the process. I think we've all like kind of delivered on the promise of showing the nitty-gritty. So like let's show what we were able to dig out. And I also feel like we wanna play around at some point or another with those results and combining them on some matrix, some axis things we found along the way. So like once you're done, what can you actually do with
what's the meta-analysis, and like what are the questions that come to our mind or people minds that we talk to, and which rabbit holes we went to we went. Yes. Just didn't know how to say it, but it was lovely talking to you, Kasia.
Same, always a pleasure.
So thank you for listening in, and till the next time.
Adios.